Hello everyone, and welcome to this Diablo 3 dungeon guide for the Necromancer Pestilence Master Shroud set. We'll be going over how to set up your character, and I'll also explain how to complete both primary dungeon objectives. Keep watching until the end to see a full playthrough of the entire set dungeon with additional tips. To get started, let's first take a look at the set bonuses so we'll know how to gear out our character. This set provides damage and toughness buffs associated with the Bone Spear skill, which we'll use as the main damage dealing attack in our build. Each corpse you consume will do two things. First, it will provide a stack of the Empowered Bone Spear buff, which is what increases the damage of the Bone Spear skill. The buff has no timer on it, so the stacks do not expire, and the buff can stack up to 100 times, though you'll basically be using up the charges as you get them and won't need to save them up. Second, consuming a corpse will also fire a Corpse Lance at an enemy, providing additional damage on top of your cast of Bone Spear. The Corpse Lances will fire at enemies even if you do not have the skill equipped. One of the primary dungeon objectives requires us to not take damage beyond a certain threshold, so therefore toughness is the main priority for the gearing and skills setup. In this setup, here are the recommended items. The most critical gear piece to obtain is Maltorius's Petrified Spike, which provides buffs to the Bone Spear skill. It is not recommended to attempt this dungeon without it. Another beneficial item to equip is the Molten Wildebeest Gizzard Legendary Gem. At gem level 25, the gem grants you a Damage Absorption Shield, which will help in completing the second primary dungeon objective. If you are struggling with toughness and need additional help completing this objective, then look to equip the Achillocurus, Dainty's Binding, and Unity. If you have too much damage output, you might have trouble completing the first primary dungeon objective that requires you to hit enemies with Bone Spear, so you may need to tone down your damage output by unequipping items or using non-optimized pieces. And here are the skills. Bone Spear is mandatory and will be the only skill we use actively, other than the occasional cast of Bone Armor and Blood Rush. Devour is also mandatory, enabling us to consume corpses. And the Dark Reaping passive skill is pretty beneficial, as it allows us to refill essence without needing to cast Bone Spikes to regain resource. Now let's go over the dungeon objectives. The first primary dungeon objective is to hit enemies 150 times with Empowered Bone Spears. As mentioned previously, consuming corpses will grant stacks of the Empowered Bone Spear buff. One of these stacks is consumed each time you cast Bone Spear. You'll naturally complete this objective without any extra effort, just by attacking monsters with the Bone Spear skill constantly throughout the dungeon. The second primary dungeon objective is to not take 400,000 damage. To complete this objective, you'll basically just stay at range casting Bone Spears. Many of the monsters will charge at you, but you should have enough damage to kill them in 1 or 2 hits before they reach you. If any get close, then just sidestep or backpedal to evade them and cast additional Bone Spears at them as needed to take them down. Elites are the only monsters with a range attack, and you can easily sidestep it. Just constantly stay on the move around any of the enemies. Cast a Bone Spear, move a few steps, cast another, move again, and repeat. Other than the monster enemies, there are no other damage sources in the dungeon. Next, let's take a look at the dungeon map. This dungeon feels quite small and is rather linear. Just follow the large loop around, making sure to clear out any offshoots as you go so you won't have to backtrack to look for stragglers. There are no special environmental features that you'll need to worry about. So now that you have the setup and you know how to approach the dungeon, let's head to it. Go to Act 3, then to the Keep Depths Level 3 waypoint. Search the zone for the entrance to the larder. The dungeon entrance is just to the right. Note that each game will have a unique layout for this area. And next we'll look at the playthrough. For this run, I went with pretty bare bones gear to demonstrate techniques. I had to equip Maltorius's Petrified Spike to have enough damage output to kill enemies. Any additional items or stats that you get, consistent with the recommendations earlier, will give you a much easier time completing the dungeon. Once inside the dungeon, head to the first group of monsters. If possible, try to focus on one of the smaller ratlings. You want to kill something quickly to get a corpse on the ground that you can then consume to grant you your damage buff. Then just continue to cast Bone Spear to kill everything you see. As you move forward, try to kill monsters from a distance before you run through any corpses on the ground. You want to hit as many enemies as possible with Bone Spear to make progress toward the first primary dungeon objective. If you run through the corpses, you'll consume them automatically via the Devour skill, which will cause Corpse Lances to fire at enemies. These Corpse Lances may kill off enemies before you've had a chance to hit them with Bone Spear. So don't be too aggressive moving forward until you've completed the first objective. You also may need to tone down your damage output if you're killing enemies too easily with Bone Spear and run out of monsters to complete the first objective. If you're struggling to complete the second dungeon objective, then hire a follower to accompany you in the dungeon and equip them with Unity to help reduce the amount of damage you take. If you see an elite, be prepared to sidestep the projectiles they shoot. Just stay on the move, casting Bone Spear every few steps. Once you've completed the first objective, you can be more aggressive about moving forward and leveraging Corpse Lances to kill off monsters. If you don't have good line of sight in tight places like this, then fire some Bone Spears first before you move forward so you don't get hit unexpectedly. And we're done. Good luck trying to finish this one. If you enjoyed the guide and would like to see more content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.